Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, China has condemned the US decision to start revoking visas of Chinese students as discriminatory. The United Nations has warned that the two-state solution to end the fighting in Gaza is on life support. And China's Tianwen-2 probe begins a 10-year mission to retrieve asteroid samples. We begin in North America. Beijing has expressed stern opposition after Washington said it would start aggressively revoking visas of Chinese students. The foreign ministry said Washington's action is discriminatory and against its claims of freedom and openness. A spokesperson said the U.S. move, with national security as an excuse, disrupts people-to-people exchanges. The spokesperson warned that it will harm the U.S. reputation and international image. The U.S. State Department website said the new visa policies put America first. The measure targeting China came after the Trump administration said it has directed overseas missions to suspend visa interviews for students. The government also threatened to ban Harvard University from enrolling non-U.S. citizens and cancel federal contracts with the prestigious school. Meanwhile, a U.S. court has blocked President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs from going into effect. The Court of International Trade found that the president overstepped his authority by imposing duties on trading partners. Owen Fairclough has more on the plan that could impact tens of thousands of Chinese students and the court ruling on tariffs.
It goes without saying this has massive implications for those Chinese students coming to study here in the United States. China is the second largest international student body behind India studying here. Chinese students represent a quarter of all international students in the US. Now, the backstory to this is that there are long-standing concerns that Chinese students are coming to the US and gaining critical expertise, particularly in the fields of tech and now artificial intelligence, and that they will take that expertise back to China for it to potentially be weaponized against the US. China has long denied that is the case. I mentioned this will affect US universities, particularly universities like Harvard, Ivy League universities, which draw a huge amount of funding from Chinese students. And remember, there's a wider context here of the Trump administration targeting US universities and deporting international students for taking part in protests against Israel's ongoing military campaign. China believes that education, cooperation, and academic exchanges should not be disrupted. A federal court in New York has essentially struck down Donald Trump's trade battles. As you remember, Donald Trump's so-called Liberation Day back in April, the Trump administration is saying it's trying to protect US jobs, protect US workers. Now, that court has essentially said, on a technicality, the Trump administration has been invoking essentially emergency powers to unilaterally impose these tariffs against these trade partners. And the argument goes that this is actually Congress's purview to direct trade policy and indeed to decide whether tariffs are appropriate. So there's a wider issue here about Donald Trump's use of executive orders. This is likely to set up a showdown with the US Supreme Court, and it will cut to the heart of just how much power a sitting US president has.
That is Owen Fairclough on the implications of recent US policies. On the Middle East, the United Nations says the two-state solution to end the fighting in Gaza is on life support. The UN's Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process told the Security Council that a high-level international conference next month presents a critical opportunity that must launch a path towards ending the occupation. Mitch McCann reports from New York.
At the United Nations on Wednesday, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process told the Security Council that it's time for decisions, not declarations. Sigrid Kaag addressed the Council just hours after large crowds of Palestinian civilians rushed an aid distribution site in the southern city of Rafah. Thousands of hungry Palestinians tore down fencing and climbed over barriers in desperation to get food. Israeli forces reportedly fired warning shots into the air.
Aid cannot be negotiable, and there can be no question of forced displacement. Civilians in Gaza have lost hope, Mr. President. Instead of saying goodbye, see you tomorrow, Palestinians now say, see you in heaven. Death is their companion. It's not life, it is not hope.
Over the past week and a half, Israel has reportedly allowed 300 UN trucks into Gaza, but the UN says 500 to 600 are needed each day. However, the aid distribution where Palestinians rushed the site was managed by the US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. At the Security Council, the US representative reaffirmed support for Israel and blamed Hamas for the failure to reach a ceasefire agreement.
Hamas continues to reject proposals from the United States, Qatar, and Egypt that would release the 58 remaining hostages who have now been cruelly held for 600 days and bring calm to Gaza. Every day, Hamas demonstrates its lack of regard for the Palestinians it claims to represent, all while it violently suppresses protests against its barbaric rule and diverts aid meant for civilians.
China, meanwhile, highlighted the hunger crisis in the enclave and renewed its calls for Israel to halt the fighting and allow more aid into Gaza.
China firmly reiterates that a durable ceasefire in Gaza cannot be delayed, and that Israel must immediately cease all military operations. Israel must lift the blockade, fully restore humanitarian access, and support UN and other international humanitarian organizations in efforts to provide assistance.
It's now reported nearly 180,000 Palestinians have been displaced since Israel's latest military offensive started. And the Security Council calls are growing louder for a lasting peace in the region 600 days into the war.
A statement from Hamas says the movement has reached an agreement with US envoy Stephen Witkoff on the general framework for a Gaza ceasefire. Hamas said it includes the release of 10 Israeli hostages and several bodies in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. But media say the US Special Envoy to the Middle East denied Hamas's acceptance of his proposal. Israeli media outlets say officials have rejected the plan. Now to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. US President Donald Trump has again expressed frustration with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin over the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. This came just a day after he posted a warning that Putin was playing with fire by resisting ceasefire talks. Moscow has proposed holding the next round of direct talks with Ukraine on June 2nd in Istanbul, while Kyiv insists on seeing the proposal in advance. The public rift between the US and Russia has unfolded amid swarms of drone attacks by Ukrainian and Russian troops. Dasha Chinishova has more from Moscow.
Well, there have been many comments coming from the Russian officials, including from the former president and now top security official Dmitry Medvedev, who has said that what the really bad thing is the World War III. And he also has stressed that he hoped that US President Donald Trump understood it very well. Those comments by Medvedev were slammed by the US envoy Keith Kellogg for stoking fears of World War III. Otherwise, we are hearing the Kremlin suggest that probably Donald Trump is not well informed indeed about the conflict in Ukraine, with Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov actually suggesting that Russia is responding to those Ukrainian attacks, and perhaps the American president is not informed about the Ukrainian attacks to which Russia is responding. And indeed, we have seen the intensification of the Ukrainian drone and missile strikes against the targets inside Russia. Up to 300 Ukrainian drones were shot down over the Russian regions on Wednesday night. And we are hearing that some damage has been done to the residential houses, even in the Moscow region. We also hear in the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying that Moscow and Washington have their own national interests and they hope that they are well respected.
That was Dasha Chinishova reporting from Moscow. In China, the country's first attempt to retrieve samples from an asteroid has begun. The mission that will take about 10 years also includes the exploration of a comet. Sun Ye has details about Tianwen-2 that launched from southwest China.
Tianwen-2, China's first asteroid sample return mission, has started. The probe was placed into its designated orbit on Thursday, and the launch was declared a complete success. Tianwen-2 aims to explore and collect samples from the asteroid 2016 H03 and return them to Earth, followed by the scientific exploration of main belt comet 311P.
I believe the exploration of small celestial bodies has significant meanings. to understand the formation and evolution of the solar system and the evolution of small celestial bodies themselves. Moreover, we hope it can provide some clues about Earth's evolution.
The Tianwen-2 mission is designed to have an operational period of about 10 years. The mission has 13 flight stages in total, and the flight process described as complex and precise. And it needs to overcome quite some challenges.
Based on current observational data, asteroid 2016 HO3 exists in an almost zero-gravity environment. Additionally, since the asteroid is in a high-speed rotation state, the probe needs to achieve stable attachment and sampling within a limited time under these complex conditions, making the task extremely challenging. And then there is the vast distance range of the Tianwen-2 mission. There is also the uncertainty of the characteristics of the target celestial bodies.
The Tianwen-2 probe carries 11 scientific payloads and will conduct research on the celestial bodies' topography, internal structure, material composition, and more. And when the samples are returned to Earth, they will be studied in detail. And people on the mission have told us they have and will continue to work tirelessly to advance human knowledge.
That was Sun Ye reporting. And finally, China has unveiled a 3-year plan on helping Pacific Island countries mitigate the impacts of climate change. Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosted officials from the islands at a ministerial meeting in eastern China.
In the next 3 years, China will implement 100 projects to address climate change in Pacific Island countries, supporting them in protecting the marine ecology, ecosystems, and coping with rising sea levels. We're willing to share early warning technology to help island countries with disaster prevention and reduction.
China and the Pacific Island countries have agreed to support equality, common development, fairness, inclusiveness, and mutual learning. Liu Jiaxing has more.
2025 marks the 50th anniversary of China establishing diplomatic relations with Pacific Island countries. Foreign ministers and representatives of 11 island countries came to the coastal city Xiamen in a show of friendship and to discuss cooperation. Various topics were discussed at the meeting. Addressing climate change was the top concern for Pacific Island countries. Wang Yi said China has donated more than 40,000 LED lamps, more than 6,000 sets of solar street lamps, more than 2,500 energy-saving air conditioners, and more than 5,200 solar photovoltaic power generation systems to Pacific Island countries. He said that China will firmly be a trustworthy, reliable, and warm partner of the Global South. Wang Yi says the third China-Pacific Island countries foreign ministers meeting aims to strengthen solidarity and cooperation, seek common development and prosperity, as well as to build a closer China-Pacific Island countries community with a shared future.
That was Liu Jiaxing in Xiamen. Now, recapping the headlines before we go, China has condemned the US decision to start revoking visas of Chinese students as discriminatory. The United Nations has warned that the two-state solution to end the fighting in Gaza is on life support. And China's Tianwen-2 probe has begun a 10-year mission to collect samples from an asteroid and explore a comet. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, the podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We would welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I am Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.